YouTube. Okay, hey everybody, we are live. This is Scott Homan with the Witness Underground Film and Podcast, and today we have one guest, Micah A. Losh, with the Apostasy book trilogy, and Anthony Mathenium. All three of us are on the Witness Underground team and running a Kickstarter right now. But can you give us a quick intro to the three books that you wrote, Micah?
Oh, yeah. So each book is titled after a shaming term Watchtower uses for people who have left. So my memoir is called Mentally Diseased. The second book in the trilogy is a collection of poetry and prose I wrote over 2 decades, and it's called Gangrenous Speeches. And then the third book is a horror novella called Despicable, which is coming out 12/10 of this year. And each book also features art by a different ExJW artist. And that's, I don't know, I think almost 3 years now, that's what I've been doing with most of my free time.
Okay. What are the three artists? Can you give them a shout out to that did your book cover art?
Yes, the Sarah Riches did the cover for Mentally Diseased. The second artist goes by the Holistic Hue on, well, formerly Twitter, now X. And then Stuart Fletcher is making the cover for Despicable.
Amazing. And then Anthony, can you quick introduce yourself as introduce yourself and with what you've created?
How would you like me to introduce myself? Hi, I'm Anthony. Happy to work with Scott and Micah on the Witness Underground documentary project and get the word out there. Happy to meet up with Micah and learn about his books because he's really prolific. He's written it's been 3 years or less than that.
So 3 books in a year, over a year, 6 months for satanic imagery.
Yeah, it's man, you're quicker than I even thought you were. So that's awesome. I just want to say right now I got a new documentary I helped produce. It's called a Psychedelic Revolution, and that's just popped up for rent or purchase on Amazon, Apple, Google Play, the usual places. So if folks want to check that out. But I'm most excited to talk about today is Witness Underground.
Yeah, that's amazing. So one thing I haven't said, and I don't always preface the show with, is that all of us were once a part of the Jehovah's Witnesses, and we are former members, post GW, ExJW. And that has generally been the theme of the Witness Underground podcast, is artists and musicians who have left that particular group, and that will expand over time to other groups, of course. But I'm always trying to work with people who have something to show, something that they've created. So one thing I wanted to get into is, so we've been, the three of us and a larger team of about, it's like 8 people plus another group of like 10 more people who are really helping get the word out about Witness Underground's release. And we have a Kickstarter. So if you're listening to this, please check out the witnessunderground.com. That redirects to our Kickstarter campaign. It has 9 more days to go, or 10 more days to go. We're really in the last 2 weeks here. We'd love to have you check it out. And I want to see what you guys have thought about working on the Kickstarter. You've been both very, very involved.
Do you want me to go first?
Yeah, sure. Okay. Honest answers.
No, I've really enjoyed it. It's been cool to I've never been involved with anything like this before, really. So, it's been cool to see people react and to meet other people who are passionate about. It's nice to find people who, are trying to use art to heal. And I think that has a lot of merit. And I feel like that's not maybe that common in the community, or maybe I just hadn't stumbled across it as much. But it's really nice to find that. And I think it's a project with a lot of merit.
Thanks.
My experience is that Kickstarters are always hell. I'm like an old veteran, like trading war wounds, just because like it's so much marketing and promotion and outreach and everything else crammed into just a small window of time. So it is a lot of work. On the plus side, I'm really happy with the reach that we're getting with this campaign. It's easy to say, oh yeah, this is a documentary that all ex-Jehovah's Witnesses should see, which I agree that's true. But it has much broader appeal. The themes generate conversations. I don't care what kind of a background a person is, and conversations not specifically about the witnesses. People I've showed it to, they take this piece of art and they apply some things to their own life and their particular journeys, and that's been amazing. I love the outreach because it's helped me to connect with people that I've lost track of over the years and catch up and see what they're doing and what I'm doing. And it's kind of reinvigorated a lot of old collaborations that kind of went dormant with life and time. So the kind of outreach has kind of sparked some new projects and getting back in gear on a couple old projects.
That's awesome. Yeah, I've had a couple people. One I met at the Emerging Filmmakers Project, Ben McAnin. He now lives in Indonesia, and he's got two films out. One's distributed in a similar way that we're distributing Witness Underground using Bitmax. We're using Film Hub, but that's been really cool to reconnect with him. Last time we saw each other was like an auto parts store in Denver, just randomly, and 7 years later to run into him with this and be like, oh my God, your film's out. And he's like a big jazz guy in Denver, and he's connected to all the old jazz legends from the 1950s beat generation. He played with those guys before they passed. He's made 2 films about jazz. And there's another woman I met in Boulder who like worked on a activist documentary project. Well, she worked on activism of like oil spill in Ecuador with Chevron and Texaco. And now there's a whole documentary. They're just about wrapping up. And it's like, oh, I had no idea you worked in doc. It's like, it's been a lot of years. So like, that's been 2 really cool connections that are related to film that came out of the woodwork. But yeah, reconnecting with people and has been really interesting. Like, it's like years of dialogue all happening in 30 days.
One strange thing about it that I've been happening is like I'll connect with some old colleague that I haven't done anything with in several years, and they're like, oh yeah, by the way, I just have a family member. They're a musician that just got kicked out of the church, and they're dealing with shunning right now. And then I was talking to my neighbors here about the documentary, and they're like, oh yeah, our friend's a musician, and she's an ex-Jehovah's Witness, and she lives a couple hours away. And we're going to this, Hindu or something festival this week, and I'll talk to her. So it's like, I think the documentary is like kind of a time capsule, but with the further Witness Underground outreach, it's like, man, we are finding a lot of interesting and varied musicians that also come from a similar background, and I think that's pretty exciting.
Yeah. And writing, what's interesting to me is that you both came out of the woodwork. I mean, Anthony, you make music, but both of you have written, and I've always had a desire to write, and I've been writing now with like, it's like write as little as possible for the biggest impact, or like be really direct and clear with your writing with the Witness Underground project and the film, and like honing my writing skills through this filmmaking process. But it's interesting because there's so many musicians a part of this, 32 albums that we're releasing with the film as part of like donated art. But the people that really stepped up were authors. And it's ultimately like Kickstarter is actually a writing process. It's like and it kind of makes sense in a way. Like go make a song about our Kickstarter doesn't really like function for outreach.
A jingle would have been awesome.
We'll do that next time. Cool. Well, I really appreciate all of your help and outreach. And if you're listening to this, check out the Kickstarter first of all, and you can get both Anthony's books and the Apostasy Trilogy from Micah. And the cool thing about Micah's books is we actually listed them as ebooks in the campaign, but you're going to get them as physical copies when you contribute to the process, when you pledge to the Kickstarter. So that's like a special bonus that everybody who gets Micah's books gets a physical copy.
Get excited, everyone! You've got a physical Christmas Apostasy Trilogy from Micah to send to your Jehovah's Witness loved ones.
Yeah. After you get multiple copies, get multiple contributions in the Kickstarter for us to fill those stockings. Micah, can you give us like I'm really curious about the second one, Gangrenous Speeches, also the name, and what kind of poetry would we find in your second book?
So I've always written. I started writing. The first poem I wrote that I didn't throw away, I wrote when I was 18. So that was 3 years after my dad died, and it's about him. And I actually have it tattooed on my back. I'm not going to show you, but I don't know. I know when I showed people that, they always reacted to it, and not just because it was sad, but I think people seem to connect with it, and so I wanted to pursue that. So it has like emo love poems about my first girlfriend, and who actually I've reconnected with after almost 20 years, and I even sent her a copy and let her read it, and she said, like, I think she said I went from like kind of having hope to just being fed up with bullshit, and just like, not, maybe not so much bitter, but just, I mean, I think in those circumstances, you know, to be abused for decades, it does something to a person. You know, it would be dishonest. But there are kind of some musings on life, people I encountered, and even like little things. I think there's one, it's about like somebody is being fed to zombies in like some, I don't explain it. It's
A little
just, that's
creative
what,
writing.
yeah, just weird thoughts that I would have, I would just pursue. And when I write, I've never, I mean, I want the reader to be entertained, but I don't care if they get what they want. Like, I like stuff that surprises you or is very much like David Cronenberg. I don't know anybody who they either love his movies or hate them, but nobody's like, yeah, they're okay, in my experience. So I kind of, I got more into just kind of writing weird things. I don't know, it just me spilled out onto paper.
Mm.
And when, you know, I titled my memoir Mentally Diseased, and then I was like, well, what do I call all of these things? And then I found a Watchtower said, avoid apostates, gangrenous speeches. And I was like, well, that's utterly absurd and pretentious. I love it. So
Cool. Yeah, it's interesting. It's almost like a collection of the Micah short stories, in a sense. Like, what was going through your head as
kind of,
you're dealing with the cognitive dissonance or
yeah.
the pressures from the religion.
Yeah, there are some that are very clearly about me dealing with my faith, or just problems I would see in the congregation and how they were mistreating people. And it was a safe place for me to write, but I also wrote a bit vaguely. And a lot of those, I remembered how I had kind of changed it. So I went back and changed them back and added in the profanity before I published it.
Added
But
back in profanity.
yeah, because in my memoir there's a poem before each chapter, and none of those are in gangrenous speeches. And then I even a scene in Despicable, it was kind of a poem, but it became longer. Pardon me, but I repurposed that into a certain scene. So, excuse me, I'm having wicked bad indigestion, too much Mountain Dew. Um,
No,
yeah,
now I see how you write so much.
yeah, caffeine and sleep deprivation. But yeah, it is really just a time capsule, and I do think it kind of shows how my writing changed. Later, I got more into not only what I said, but the words used, and kind of making them rhyme and have a rhythm. I know George Carlin would kind of do that, and he was always my favorite comedian. Growing up, every time, you know, we'd go to a get together, and people would say, "Who do you want to talk to in the resurrection?" And people would be like, you know, Moses and Abraham, and then it gets me, and I'd be like, George Carlin. You'll be like, well, he had a foul mouth. I'm like, I don't care. He was funny. That's who I want to talk to. So
I would love to see his routine on a Paradise Earth. It'd be like, here's the 144,000 words you can't say in paradise. Lucky, or just something like that.
and you know what's crazy is years ago, I even showed my mom this like 10-minute clip of him ranting about religion. Now she laughed, but something he said resonated with me. And even though it was a dumb joke, he said, when you look around, you see that something is wrong. This is not a work that belongs on the resume of a supreme being. This is the kind of shit you'd expect from an office temp with a bad attitude, which I think is hilarious. But that always rattled around in my brain. I'm like, yeah, this just, you know, it doesn't make sense. So that's one of the reasons I love art, because you can put in little lines however you do it, and somebody down the line might read that and it might save their life.
Mhm.
I have a question for Micah real quick. Do I understand correctly that you reuse some poetry and stuff you wrote while you were still within the organization? Is that correct?
Yeah,
Or is this all
so
written after you exited?
so my first and third book were written after. Um, in my first book, the poetry before each chapter I had written before, and then I just had all this unused, about 100 pieces, and that was the middle book. So I did not write those in. Yeah.
I just wonder,
I
as
have
a
a
writer looking back at what you wrote, I mean, do you get any new insights? I mean, sometimes I feel like I wrote something, think I was writing one thing, I'll give it some time, some space. I look back at it, it's like, oh, you were writing about, this life circumstance or this feeling. I mean, do you ever see new things in what you wrote?
Yeah, I remember I wrote one thing once, about, well, one of my best friends, but I guess my best witness friend. But when I was younger, I was overweight, and I even remember once, we went on vacation together, and the whole trip he just mocked me for calling me fat and all this stuff. And so I wrote this poem about someone holding a candle, and it catches I think their dress on fire. It's a woman, and it's kind of like betrayal. But I remember that person did something to me which was really, really wrong. And of course, I tried to go through the channels of the congregation and the elders, and they just dismissed me. Told me to wait on Jehovah. So I mean, yes, but also a lot of it, I think it was just I had so much frustration, and I was so isolated because pretty much everyone in the hall avoided me or disliked me because I had depression. That was just all I could do was put it in there. But I had to write it in a way where if it was found, I had plausible deniability.
That's
as
kind of
a
interesting. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry, I'm taking over the
go ahead,
interview,
Anthony.
Scott. Go
No, no,
ahead.
no, no, go ahead. No, we're co-interviewing. Go ahead.
Oh, we're co-interviewing. Great. This is, I'm gonna just throw it back to music, but in the documentary, I think it's either Eric or Chad says, "Oh, the songs were never topical about the religion." But when you go back and look at a lot of the art material that came out of Nuclear Gopher through that lens, you say, well, they weren't using these explicit words of, kingdom words or whatever in their songs, but they were often writing about, those experiences. And I think writing like literature, music, whatever, where you can make it sound like not what you're writing about, that's kind of a healthy thing, I guess, in those kind of environments.
You can like code your ideas into something that only you would know.
Yeah.
It's actually a creative, like you kind of, in some cases you have to. There's actually a film coming out. I just got sent the script by this director actor in LA. We had a chat yesterday, and she's like, "Why don't you read the script?" And it's about her diary while a witness being found by someone, probably family. I can't remember exactly the details. I'm going to read the script, and it's basically a true story to her, or very, very influenced by this true story, probably 90% true. And it gets the real part is that it gets given to the elder body, and then she's interrogated by the entire elder body, like line per line of her private diary, and like how demeaning that is. And there's stuff in there about, she's exploring sexuality and different ideas and beliefs, and it just gets like pushed before like this huge body is like 7 different elders or something. So invasive. But like this idea of like coding your ideas, coding where you're at.
Yeah, I never.
Well, back in the day, I had a blog. This is the live journal days. Sorry, the signal's broken. I was just saying I was having a blog back in the live journal days, and the elders pulled me in the back room. Finally, there's like I had almost like a whole shelf of blog entries printed out.
Wow.
Yeah, I never had that. I remember in Sing Praises to Jehovah. Do you remember in the back it was all the angels or whatever singing? I don't remember if they were angels.
It's like a guy holding.
They were like,
yeah, there was one was.
Yeah.
Well, I had written the lyrics to a Marilyn Manson song on it. It was from the Golden Age of Grotesque, and it's this really stupid thing where he says like dole dag a buzz buzz ziggity zag got my grotesque burlesque drag. And my mom found that and was so upset with me and like destroyed the book and made me get a new one. I mean, I didn't go before the elders, but I just remember like I could just see like I was like 20 and just her disgust at me, just like, how dare you? And I'm like, oh my, like there was no profanity in it even.
Yeah, they almost treat their own literature as holy. Like it's not the Bible. Like we
And,
can make fun of these bad
and it's always
drawings.
changing. Yeah. Well, even I mean JW Broadcasting.
It's so embarrassing.
Well,
feel so bad for anyone in that religion who has that as like their I follow this TV channel. Like you worship a TV channel now, like and a URL logo that only works in one language. What is happening?
It's so cringeworthy, and people will talk about, you know, how encouraging it is, and it's just like, well, I remember one time, of course, I got in trouble again. I was like, JW Broadcasting, I've seen better acting in porn, and I just remember all of the air went out of the room. I was always getting in trouble, I guess.
I had a conversation with my older brother about that because, I mean, okay, I used to say like, have you guys seen the Jehovah's Witness website? And I've had Jehovah's Witnesses like in year 2000 say like, there is no Jehovah's Witness website. If you're looking at websites, Jehovah's Witnesses don't use the internet. We're not allowed to use the internet. What are you doing? I was like, no, there's like a legit website for the religion. And they're like, no, there is not. It's like, it was like jw-media.net or something at the time. And I was like, and they had a really bad logo of like a Nike swoosh, but it was like a little bit of doubt. It was like, they don't know what they were doing. Like they hired someone who'd never used the internet to make a website. And I was just like always watching, see what's going on. And now it's like, no, we don't have books, and our God is like, I don't know, like they're basically living in a 1984 weird reality where the faces on the television and they have to just obey the TV screen now, and it's a website that they're telling everyone to go check out. It's really so strange. Even I went to a memorial to film something in 2018 when I was in Vietnam. And nobody had books or paper. They only had apps and iPads and like weird tablets. I was like, I'm in like another alternate reality. Like, does this religion totally change what it is every 10 years? Like, what's happening?
Well, when they rolled that out, I remember there were people with tablets, you know, they got fancy new ones and the leather cases. And half of our congregation, me included, we were like Luddites. We were like, oh no, if you're not touching the Bible, you're not like interacting with God's word, you're not going to receive the Holy Spirit. And then at some point, I think it was from the stage, they said it didn't matter if you looked at an actual Bible or a tablet or phone. And then in my mind, I was like, oh, that's okay. But at the same time, I knew like when I grew up, when I was growing up, televangelism was condemned, Christian rock was condemned, and they were just doing all this stuff. But the new light, you know, it's like, oh, yeah, you know. So it's crazy now, like with not turning in time, because I don't know how you would reconcile that, because that was one of the main ways the congregation ostracized me, because I was very rarely regular, you know, with my preaching, which that makes me want to vomit saying my preaching, but
well, one thing I wanted to get to with your books is, would you like, I want to empower, no, I don't want to empower. I want people to feel empowered. And I think that through both of you making books, or, you know, what I'm planning to write and this film and the songs people are putting together that's available in the Kickstarter, everything we've ever dreamed of is there. With all that art and creativity, like, would you recommend with what you have done, the way you did it, the way you released it, can you kind of give someone who's thinking about writing something or wondering, you know, is a memoir a good idea, or like, what do I do with all this old poetry? Could you give them a path that you think works?
Yeah. So like with me, when I was like sitting down thinking, I wanted to share my story. I felt like it had merit. I wasn't too familiar with ExJW content. And my memoir deals a lot with depression and trigger warning, but you know, suicide, alcoholism. It's a dark read, but I kind of had to put my ego away to put it out there. Like there in one chapter, I talk about I stayed overnight with a girlfriend and I didn't sleep with her, but the elders asked me very, very intrusive questions. And I mean, it is embarrassing, but in all honesty, they should be embarrassing. But I just had to sit and think, whether or not people hate this or love it, I had to come to terms with that because it is a very vulnerable thing to put that out into the world. I think if you're going to do that, you should think about it first and really be okay with it. But then you just have to write it. And for me, so I published my memoir on my 40th birthday to kind of make up for never celebrating any of my birthdays. And then originally I was just going to do that one book, but let me see, I got on a website called Upwork. I found an editor. I found a lawyer to review it because I didn't want to be sued by Watchtower. On Twitter is where I found Sarah Riches and reached out to her. And I just kind of did all the pieces. I did it piecemeal, and for me, that was a very empowering thing. And especially after just being abandoned to die in the streets a little over 3 years ago, it really made me feel good to know that, especially for my son, I want him to learn the story, but it was a very personal thing. And I feel like there's been a lot of personal growth there as well. And yeah, it led to really cool things because once it came out, then I saw people that had written reviews, or they said, because it does kind of end abruptly, but it's really just kind of dealing with, that time period. And then people were like, I'd like to hear more from you. And so, yeah, it's been a really positive experience, but really writing a book, I mean, that's the hardest part, sitting down and doing it. I heard, I just happened to see a clip because I was Googling, like, how do you write a book? How do you tell a story? And they're all that, you can find all these articles, or how to even write a memoir almost as fiction, where you add like internal monologue and make it more interesting, I would say. But it was Joe Rogan. He just said, if you want to write a book, he said, he said, so many people say they want to do that and they never do. And he said, you need to sit down where you've already ate, you're caffeinated, you're rested, and put time into it every single day. And so I just started doing that. Originally, I tried for an hour, but then some days with work and stuff, I could only do 5-10 minutes, but I made sure I did something. And then even on the days when I was despairing or just feeling terrible, I kind of would expand the filter and be like, okay, well, you've written, 15, 20,000 words, this many pages. And then I had a few people I met that I trusted, and I would, ask them for feedback. And, but really, I just kind of figured it out along the way. But sorry if I took a long way to. Oh, hold on. I can't hear you, Scott.
Oh, thank you. I was muted. Could you shorten for the audience the path to doing it? I mean, you gave some tips there, like write every day a little bit. Is there any other like gems of knowledge that you've learned? And I guess I can also go to Anthony after Micah. You've answered that.
I mean, because like I guess the technical part, like, buying the ISBN numbers and all of that, is really not that difficult. You just have to research it. But I think planning out your story, I mean, I think if you want to write, that you would write, it's like I would love to make music, but I can't sing. And when I try and drum, my arms move the same. So, I mean, for me, it just felt like a very natural thing because I had always done it. So I just kind of went ahead and did it,
There's one thing I heard from David Lynch. He's like, you want to make a feature film? Get some recipe cards, like 3x5 note cards, or what you'd maybe for an outline for a speech, and write down 75 movie scenes, and then put them on the ground or a table, and then rearrange them in order how you think the story would flow in the most interesting way, and then go write one scene per card. And this card's like a title of the scene, like this is the scene in the kitchen where the wife talks to the new boyfriend or whatever, or whatever the thing might be, and then you lay it all out in this like creative way. We have like, here's your whole story you're kind of putting together, and then go write a thing for each card in detail. And I always wonder if there's like any kind of like shortcut, fun way to do that for writing.
Well, for me, I guess I had certain parts I want to address and I had them there, and then I would revisit and kind of flesh them out. But also, certain parts where I was very angry or sad, I would make a playlist of depressing music or empowering angry music, or even one edit I did of mentally diseased, because I did 10 or 15 myself before I sent it to my editor. I just listened to Eminem. I mean, so for me, music was really empowering and kind of helped me get into the mood for different parts and how to convey that. But
It's a cool trick.
Yeah, I always kind of plan it in my head before I put it down, though. That's how I've always kind of worked. But
okay, how do you have a trick or a method, Anthony, that's worked for you? And maybe you could like tell the audience what books you've worked on to give an idea of the breadth of your work.
Oh, sure. My kind of exit novels from Jehovah's Witnesses was Paradise Earth Day Zero, which is a speculative fiction about the end times. And I followed that up with Happiness Next Exit, which is a Jehovah's Witness romance novel. That is available as part of the campaign. And beyond that, I've worked on graphic novels and comic books and stuff. The biggest thing is allow yourself to write like absolute shit. There's so many people that are like, oh, I'm writing a book. Oh, can I see it? Well, I've only got the first 3 paragraphs totally perfected. Okay. And, they spend like forever going back, edit, going back, edit, and I used to do this thing called National Novel Writing Month, where you were tasked with writing a novel in a month's time, which meant that you could never write a very good novel in a month's time, but it caused you to write, something of a beginning, something of a middle, something of an end. It caused you to write every day, which is something Micah said, and I agree with that wholeheartedly. But yeah, you write a terrible first draft, and then you set it aside, you go back to it, and then you write a serviceable second draft. And then the process goes on. Maybe you get an editor involved or some outside feedback, and you do it. So that's it. I just say allow yourself to write crap. Ryan's gifting me a typewriter, so I won't be allowed to edit anymore for when I work on my next novel out here. So it's
nice.
Just
the perfect off-grid writer.
Goes, man. Yeah, exactly. It's like I gotta be like a legit off-grid writer with my like typewriter, and I'll probably have to switch from cigarettes to a pipe to complete the effect. Yeah, that's the biggest tips. I don't know. I'd say get an outside editor, of course, when the time is right, because that's always valuable feedback. And I don't know. Be honest, be true. Use the right
How about
words.
writing? Like you've written graphic novels and other things after writing stuff about the religion. What's the difference between like writing something about a very, very personal topic, especially something so deep and insane as what we've all kind of gone through with leaving this faith? How is that different from writing something that's not associated with that faith? I guess, Micah, you've done 3 on the topic. Are you going to write something on the topic, or are you going to move away from that topic?
Does Anthony want to go first or me?
Either way, yeah. That
was
a very direct to Micah question. Are you going to write something after the trilogy? The Apostasy Trilogy. We're talking about Micah about the Apostasy Trilogy.
So I do have an idea for a 4th book, but what I want to do, I already have a bit of it started. I want to make a collection of short stories, because like mentally diseased is pretty much just what happened. Everything in it is true. Certain things are told in different order to make more sense, but. And then, I've written poetry and stuff. And then writing a horror story, for me, that was easier because mentally diseased is just 120 some pages of horrible thing after horrible thing. And it all happened to me. And there's, so every day it's like, oh, let me rip my heart open. And I mean, it was very depressing. I felt such relief to get through that. And then, Gangrenous Speeches was kind of revisiting, but like Despicable, I don't know, it was easier to write because it was more fun. I mean, it is based on, a fictitious religion and, dark topics, but it's hopefully it's a story where it's filled with horrible people, but the main bad guy is like not as terrible as them. So you don't really care what he's having done to them. But that's been fun. And I just like I love Stephen King. I love Edgar Allan Poe. I love horror movies or like dark music, grunge or metal. So I just want to tell weird stories and, hopefully people like them.
Right on. How about you, Anthony?
Like, so I wrote those first two Jehovah's Witness novels, like Paradise Earth. It was my kind of grim, bitter, honest look at it all. And then I wrote Happiness, which is more lighthearted. After I was like, okay, so I'm done writing in that Jehovah's Witness headspace, even though I left Paradise Earth on a terrible cliffhanger for a book 2 that never came. It's just like I was done with trying to be in that headspace. So then I started seeing those, like, okay, I'm gonna write another novel. Well, what's it about? Oh, it's about another cult, you know? Or like the stuff was bleeding into my comic work and stuff. It's like I still, I guess, had feelings to get out about it. But I guess the last thing that I'm currently working on is this graphic novel about Ernest Hemingway, and it's just that to me was the palate cleanser because Hemingway doesn't get disfellowshipped and his wife doesn't die of a blood transfusion. He just fights Nazis and sharks and drinks, and it was like, to me, that I'm looking forward to having that, and I'm talking with the artist about plan to continue that. But that was my palate cleanser. That said, kind of getting back involved in this whole Witness Underground thing and having to go out there on a daily basis and tell everybody about your life, it's kind of like, yeah, I guess I should finish that Paradise Earth book, and maybe I'm in a healthy point where I can revisit that headspace and kind of live in it for a few months.
Yeah.
Maybe not, but I might try on Ryan's typewriter he's gifted me.
I wonder, could both of you, Mike, start with Micah. There's a theme that we've been talking a lot about with Witness Underground, the film and the podcast, which is that using art, creativity, writing, music, etc., can shorten the duration to process trauma, or maybe actually process the trauma, whereas many other methods might actually not do the trick. Can you speak to the benefit of having written on the topic and like hitting it straightforward first with a memoir? Like, did that help, do you think?
Yeah. So while I was writing it, I had hoped for catharsis. And I didn't really get that because I know there's still abusing people all over the world. I'm just aware of that. So it's not something I can just walk away from. But what I felt was empowerment, and then really cool things started to happen. Like I would have people reach out and say, like, "Wow, I read what you wrote, and it's like," one person said, "It's like you read, or it's like you wrote my thoughts down." And so it was really cool because for me, growing up a witness, I really never fit in. And then when you're just thrown out into the world, you're like, wow, I don't understand anything. And I don't feel like anybody understands me. So I do feel like finding that connection and knowing that you're not the only one who has gone through it, it is really beneficial. And it did kind of, once I had written it all down, it was like, okay, all of that's between two covers now, and it's on a shelf. But I did kind of feel like I had dealt with it and addressed it by taking something horrible, and hopefully, I wanted to show people, you can lose everything, you can be destroyed, and you can still tell Watchtower to kick rocks, and you can still pursue your passion. And I mean, I wanted to tell my son more that more than anyone else. But yeah, it's been a really great experience for me personally.
And I think the creative process is a bit alchemical. What you do is you're transmuting when you're writing about like a bad past, like you're taking a bunch of shit and turning it into gold. You're getting your thoughts out and you're making it beautiful, even if it's a real grim, dark book. There's something about that. If you have a bug to write, then that's an excellent way to get your feelings out about it. Yes, there are a ton of Jehovah's Witness type memoirs out there, but your story is unique. they're never all the same. It's like
Yeah.
Micah's story is not my story, which is not your story, Scott. And yeah, I've never written a memoir. Happiness was very loosely based on a specific window of my life towards my personal exit. And I don't know if I could write a memoir, but maybe I'd attempt it someday. I feel like it would have to be like a manga series with like individual sagas. Like here's the Jehovah's Witness saga. Here's the Asheville, North Carolina saga. Here's the Living in the Woods, like Grizzly Adams saga, and then whatever sagas will come.
It's interesting to compartmentalize a life into time segments or intervals. I often think about life that way. Like, this is the time now where I'm living in Panama and it rains every day, and I'm sitting at a table writing everyone I've ever met in my whole life. That's a set period of time, 1 month of the Kickstarter. But I feel like I've also had like separate circles my whole life. Like, I've had like my high school circle, but then even had like the jocks, the hockey team, the filmmaking team, the skateboarders, the snowboarders, the musicians. Like, those are some of those fused together. A lot of those are very separate. And then there was the Jehovah's Witnesses. And then there was like, and then throughout my life, even for like another decade, there was like, well, I'm going to have these two separate circles and they don't really ever intersect. I'm the only thing that goes between those circles. And at some point in my life, I was like, I want to fuse my circles. What will happen if all of my circles collide? And then really interesting relationships happen, and like people started dating, and then some people got, and it's not like I'm not taking credit for their successful relationship or their divorce, but I think it's interesting to fuse the circles and like the time intervals. Like, it's just an interesting way to like see life. Like, do my compartmentalizing my life or the lives of the people in my life or my own time? And this idea, someone brought up the other day in an interview about like the idea of a witness, the Jehovah's Witnesses. It's like you're observing something, but are you really a part of it? And it's a little bit more chaotic if you mix all your circles together. And it's a little bit simpler if you have compartmentalized time. That's kind of abstract, I guess, but I want to read your manga series. I have a book idea. So I actually went back to Los Angeles because I have like my last things I own in my Volkswagen stored at a friend's place. And in there was like my Jehovah's Witness leather suitcase or briefcase I used to go door to door with. And in there is like my mastered audio from my bands, like the original 4 tracks, unmastered, that is. And Ryan now has that at the Nuclear Gopher Studio in Minneapolis. He's like it's now part of the Nuclear Gopher archive. But I had all my journals in there. And the journals started at like 14, 15 when I started playing music. And I was like, all right, the religion's serious. End of the world's coming. I want to be like Nirvana, like all the contradictions that come with being a teenager. And I was writing, and then it became like, well, I'm taking church notes at the conventions of what's going on, mixed with like poetry and like this song is influencing me, and this girl's super cute, and here's my drawings of something. So I went there and I got all these journals and I was reading through them, just like, is this one valuable or am I taking it with me? I basically brought everything with except for some calendars that have interesting dates. I took photos of every page of every calendar, and I have like 25 journals over the course of about 10 years with the idea of making something like your second book. It sounds like a little bit mix of poetry, my lyrics and my notes and my journaling, and the cognitive dissonance that was like obviously present and some me raging against something an elder said or whatever. And it's like just reading through it, I was paging through and I was like I was getting nauseous just like looking at who I used to be.
Yeah.
So I'll ask you both, I guess, but especially Micah, because you just like got your fresh book out and this is the Apostasy Trilogy interview. What do you think? How would you approach? Could you give me advice on how to approach taking that collection and turning it into something valuable?
Yeah, so I would say, I think the great thing about that too is, Watchtower is always changing, like we talked about, they're always switching and, oh, we don't do this, but now we do, but those stories are evidence of how it was, how they were. And then, but for me, like my story, I wanted to kind of deal with, indoctrination and propaganda and how I feel it and faith, how all 3 of those things failed me so many times in my life. my father martyred himself and died for this cult. My mother shuns me. The night my son was born, my mother told me to deny him blood when he was flown to Riley. And it didn't come to that, but I don't know whether or not I would have, denied him blood. Like, that's the control they had over me. So I think maybe trying to find a theme within all of them and then pull a thread through it, because I think with Stephen King, I mean, he said, kill your darlings, and in my memoir, that was just what happened. But I think, if you can make it cohesive, it'll have more impact, because, but yeah, I think it's just, those things are so cool because you can look back with disgust and say like, oh God, like, but at the same time, you're like, well, what did they do to this poor kid? Like he didn't understand, and and you didn't know what you didn't know. So I think it's to be vulnerable and talk about the mistakes and just how it failed you and caused problems in your life. I think I mean, that's kind of what I try to do with mine, but I don't want to tell you how to tell your story.
Yeah. What do you both think about the idea of there's an ex-witness, Dan Clark, I think. I can't remember. That's probably not the right person. There's an ex-witness, and he just did this YouTube thing, and he's like, someone gave him this gift that was basically like, stop telling that story. That's not who you are. That's something in your past. What do you want your story to be? And I think there's a lot of that happening personally, but also within the ex-witness community of people sort of feeling stuck in that identity and also in the drama of being an ex-witness and the religion being oppressive and influencing their lives for the worse. About like, yeah, let's tell our story, but then like move on. Is this writing a book help us do that? Or is it like keep us stuck? Because it's like now it's a part of our product we're pushing, and now we have to like do book tours and go on interviews and talk about this.
Do you want to respond to that first, Anthony?
Yeah, why don't I? Because I got to jump out for another thing here. Yeah, I don't know, man. It's hard. There's like, a part of me that would be like, oh, I never wanted to go back into Jehovah's Witness space ever again in my life. And here I am in support of Witness Underground because I believe in it. I want to get the word out about it, having to go back out in there and tell these stories. So what you said is valid. Like, you write a book, okay, do you want to sell the book or get it readers? Well, that means going and telling your story. And, that's a tough thing to do. Can you mentally handle it? I think there's value in doing it early on. What I'm trying to learn right now is there value doing it, 10 years down the road, or even longer in my case down the road, where, you've got some ground behind it. The emotions maybe aren't so raw anymore and, heightened. Maybe you can have more objectivity to look back at things. I don't know. It's kind of an interesting experiment in my life right now, so I'll have to see how it all shakes out. But I do believe there's value in creative expression, be it writing or music, and I encourage everybody to do it.
Thanks for that. All right, see, you're heading out, Anthony?
Yeah, unfortunately, I have another meeting to attend to, but I just encourage everybody, because it's the right time to do so. Please back Witness Underground on Kickstarter. Please see this documentary and listen to these songs, and you'll understand why we're gushing so hard about it, because it really is a special thing. Bye, everyone. Be blessed.
Take care, Anthony.
Hey, Anthony.
Thanks for popping in.
Okay, so, it's an interesting question. I don't feel like I've stagnated. For me, I don't know. I was going to therapy, and my whole life growing up, anytime I was depressed or suicidal or said, well, I was just born into this, I'm not, honest hearted, I don't belong here. My mom would send me to a therapist. So for me, like, writing really kind of helped me to process and deal with things. There are a lot of embarrassing things in my story, but I mean, I would say all the worst things about me are in there. I figured, I don't want to be the ExJW with the worst exit, but and I'm not claiming I am, but if other people go through very acrimonious, painful things, I know when I first got on the ExJW Reddit, or I was on Twitter, I think it was Twitter, and someone was talking about how their child was kept from them, and you could just tell their mental health was deteriorating, and then they disappeared, and then somebody posted an article they'd killed themselves, and I didn't know them very well, but and I can't stop that. But for me, if I didn't share the hell I went through, you know, I just felt compelled to. I felt that I had to, because I don't want people to come out of this religion and kill themselves, because it serves Watchtower's narrative. It serves that's what happens when you leave Jehovah, and they don't care that you die. No one cares. They won't even have a funeral for you. Probably they'll say, well, hopefully he'll get a resurrection. They do not care about mental health, and I feel like a big part of my story, which mentally disease kind of serves that, but I just had this terrible depression, and every time I would go to a therapist, they would say, leave this religion, which I would interpret as Satan trying to draw me out, and I would quit and go back to them over and over. And like I said, for me, I put my story between two covers, and I wrote the book for my son. There even in the end of the book, there are 3 letters, one to my mother, one to my stepson, and one to my son. And the one to my mother is an apology. It's just short, and I mean, that relationship is over. But for me, it just, being in Watchtower and beginning to suspect it was a cult during COVID, I just began binge drinking, and of course, Watchtower, I thought alcohol was safe because it was approved by God. That's how naive I was. So, when I was drinking 24 beers, then I went to hard liquor, and I was drinking like a fifth of vodka a night, and then bourbon, scotch, and it kept escalating. And I wound up in jail, which I took. That's the middle of my memoir. And then the second portion is when I got into AA, and it was the similarities and the thought terminating cliches. And it was so much like being a Jehovah's Witness that it was staggering to me.
Mm-hmm.
And that was really kind of what jarred me in thinking, oh, this isn't unique. This is all about control. Mm-hmm. And that was really because I would see all these people in AA talking about how they're doing crystal meth or, hardcore drugs that I know nothing about, and fear that don't want anything to do with. And people would say, well, if you just pray every day, if you read the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, if you come to meetings. And then I'd hear people say, I've never come to an AA meeting and not felt better afterwards, which is what I would hear about meetings at the Kingdom Hall. And it was just horrifying. And I was stuck in this place. So I did not leave a cult. It was a lateral move, and it was just wave after wave of propaganda. And I just said, no, I refuse to pray. I don't believe in God. And even if he's real, I don't think he deserves worship. And they hated me for that.
Wow. Interesting.
For me, it's like the steamroller will not determine if the rock is destroyed. It is the rock. And I'm not calling myself the rock, but just no. I absolutely will not, be controlled that way anymore. And of course, it was interpreted as, oh, you want everyone to do drugs, or I haven't touched alcohol in over 3 years, and I work in a bar. I said, I'm not going to drink anymore. I'm a man of my word. Can we crack on? But there's no money in people behaving that way. It's, you're weak and you have a spiritual malady and all this. So my memoir,
emphasis on your sin and your inability to function without the higher power or the community.
They told me I had a spiritual malady and all these things. And there were and every time I asked questions, nobody had answers. It was just, oh, why are you asking? You think too much. It was so much. It was just a lateral move. And so for me, I didn't care about the embarrassing stuff or stuff. I mean, there is stuff that I'm ashamed, but it can't have been any other way. As much as I always hated hearing that, and I would hear old people and I'd be like, this idiot. But it's true. It can't have been any other way. It's a waste of time to wish it could have been. All you can do is not even plan for the future. I mean, you can do that, but you can live in the moment. And I like, after I published Mentally Diseased, I just remember, like, I was walking one day and I just felt so good. And it was like, someone had sent me a message telling me it resonated with them. And I was like, I'm living in the moment, and I never have done that. So I think it's a great thing. Maybe it's not for everybody to, because I have had a few negative comments, maybe like 1 or 2%. Overall, people have been very supportive, or even, I mean, there is a lot of darkness in it, but people have said, like, they thought it was well written. It's just, it's a lot of very, very dark stuff.
Man, there's a couple of things I want to quick say before we wrap up, but I went to AA as a supporter for a friend back in Colorado, like 10 years ago. And it was like her 7th year sober. And I went there to check it out. And I was astonished by the similarities of how things were formulated to Jehovah's Witnesses. And then at the time I was living in a community living situation, a commune. It was like an anarchist commune. There's a bunch of like people in the burbs, trying to like do something new in their mind. It was a new thing. And people have been making community living spaces for centuries. But anyway, so they had this like kind of vibrant, fun community. And I liked a lot of the people there. And it was like a couple hundred people, but it was like this house of like 20. Anyway, there's an ex-Mormon couple there from Utah. And so I was like, oh man, check this out, dude. We were friends, right? And I was like, he knew I was an ex-Witness. And I was like, I just went to my new favorite cult. He's like, oh, which one? And I was like, AA. And then we high-fived. And then it was like this really funny moment that only ex-cult members would like totally get. Like, and we talked about some of the similarities of AA to Mormons and Jehovah's Witnesses. But then like someone in our community had just started going to AA, and I didn't know that, and they were in another room. I didn't even know they were in the building. And then I realized how culty the place I was living was, because there was some weird rule that you can like oust someone forever without asking anyone else, and like everyone has the power to kick out someone from the community forever. And I was like, we have a shunning policy here. What am I a part of right now? I thought this is just like a bunch of my community like trying to do something new and empowering. Anyway, so there's a whole story there, but in the end, I made up with that person and helped them understand that calling AA a cult was a joke, not like a damnation on the process for them and their alcohol journey. But anyway, it's very culty, people, and it has problems.
And the success rate is not good. And like, if you ask me why I believe something, I would tell you. But when I've asked those people, they get really mad, and they can't. They're like, well, not. They'd be like, well, the big book says, and I'm like, I've read it. I don't agree with it. But yeah, there's just no room for you. Either conform or you're perceived as this other, almost evil.
Like you're attacking their faith in that system or something.
Well, so they have shaming terms too: dry drunk and terminally unique, which I've been called both.
Whoa.
Yeah, so it's you 100% accept the dogma, or you're those things, or you never had a problem to begin with. It's whatever. The house always wins. Yeah, it's I mean, but at least I wound up there because it made me realize, because confronting the truth when you really think Satan is in your mind controlling you that's a hard thing to overcome.
Yeah. We're going to wrap here. We got a minute left. Could you give the audience, talk about your book inclusion in the Kickstarter, what you think of the Kickstarter, and maybe like wrap up like how it's going for you?
Yeah.
How to get involved.
Witness Underground is a really cool documentary, and I'm very proud to have my book trilogy be a part of it. I think you should definitely check it out. Like and share and donate if you can. And almost a year ago, I published a memoir, and then that led to me publishing a second book, and then writing a third. And even this year, earlier, I spoke to the Attorney General and PA, and then you reached out to me to help with this. Like, writing a book has just, it's been how I reinvented myself, and it's been a great journey. And I'm very flattered and humbled to be a part of it.
Cool. Really appreciate it. I'm so happy to have your book as a part of the campaign and to get to know you. When I first started seeing your interviews pop up, I was like, "Oh, this guy's got a voice and he's interesting." So I really appreciated what you have to say, and I'm glad you're still going for it. And it's interesting to like make a piece of art with my film, with your books. All of a sudden, like now you're part of this community of people who made a film and a book, and like that's a different world, right?
Yeah, it's very cool. And even like sometimes I'll be like, yeah, I gotta make a call to my friend, my filmmaker friend Scott, and like it's just it's just cool to know people that are actually doing things that are akin to what you want to do, because I just love art. I can tell you do. You can tell everybody involved with this does, and hopefully it draws people that not only appreciate it but want to get involved too, because it's a really, really cool thing.
Yeah, that's one of the big goals. Is what happens after this is like the collaborations that you and I can do, Anthony. I mean, Anthony and I are actually just getting to know each other as well, and you guys have been a really big part of this. And Denise in England, and then there's like another group of like 10 more people who have channels and have projects of their own that are super cool that are like trying to help and get the word out. And it's working. We're at 64% this morning on our Kickstarter. We have 10 more days to go, and I'm really curious about how like putting this out there will bring artists out of the woodwork to like, oh, that's cool. Or like people might want to start making art. I want to encourage people to go
Yeah.
write that bad chapter of a book and publish it on your blog or whatever the thing is that you get excited to do. I really appreciate you giving your voice to the project and lending your art to it and coming on for the interview.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks for having me, Scott.
Yeah. Everybody check out the Apostasy Trilogy, and you can get it right now as part of witnessunderground.com. Our Kickstarter is live. Thank you so much. Take care.
Bye, guys. Check it out.